Britain's Muslim Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said at last September's Labour Party conference that she was aghast at a rise in ethno-nationalism, which she defined as a small-minded version of patriotism which would exclude her from being considered truly British or English.
I am a patriot, proudly so. Mine is the patriotism of Orwell, pride in a country that is forever changing, while also ineffably always the same. It is a love of this country as an open, tolerant, generous place. But that broad vision of who we are is increasingly disputed. Patriotism, a force for good, is turning into something smaller, something more like ethno-nationalism, which struggles to accept that someone who looks like me and has a faith like mine can truly be English or British.
I don't agree with Shabana Mahmood's use of ethno-nationalism there, because it's not a term that I personally use to describe my own philosophy, but of course I recognise that Shabana Mahmood cannot be truly British or English, because being English is a matter of ancestry, and Shabana Mahmood was born to two Pakistani parents on the 17th of September 1980 in Birmingham. They're both Pakistanis from Mirpur, as the majority of Pakistanis in Britain are, and she is a Sunni Muslim. She has said in repeated interviews that her Sunni Muslim faith informs all that she does, and is the driving factor for why she felt called to public service as a Labour politician and now Britain's Muslim Home Secretary. So I don't agree with Mahmood, but by Mahmood's own standards, when she says that she has the patriotism of George Orwell, would George Orwell agree that Mahmood is truly British or English, or would Orwell be, by Mahmood's own standards, a vile ethno-nationalist? Well, just looking at George Orwell's background, Orwell was born in Motihari, which is in the Bengal presidency of the British administration of India in 1903. So is George Orwell Indian, Shabana? Like Rudyard Kipling or Joanna Lumley? Are they Indian just by being born in India? What if they felt Indian on the inside? Would George Orwell be one of India's greatest writers? Or, like the other Brits who were expelled from India after decolonisation, is George Orwell an Englishman no matter where he is born, because of his parentage, because of his ancestry, because of his ethnicity? Is it that we inherit something immutable from our parents that makes us one nationality or another? So would George Orwell have recognised Shabana Mahmood as being as English as himself, or would he conclude that her seniority in the British government is a consequence of us having lost a war to Pakistan? Well, we can read George Orwell's texts to find out. So this is the first chapter of The Lion and the Unicorn, a long essay about a particularly English form of socialism that Orwell tried to articulate. And the first chapter is called England, Your England. And in the essay, Orwell explains that what makes a civilization recognisable to a generation born a century apart is, yes, the external characteristics, the aesthetics, the traditions, the customs and culture and folkways that act as a signpost to common ancestry and common identity between one ancestry and another. It's a bit like looking at an old photograph of yourself. You look different, but you can recognise it's the same person because you share some similar external traits, even though they've changed, weathered, grown over time. So you have to be the same thing in order to exhibit the same characteristics, because those external characteristics are signposts for a way of life that is intuitive, so not just the people who invented it, but the people who are descended from those who invented it, and carry the culture as a burning flame in their hearts. Orwell wrote, "When you come back to England from any foreign country, you have immediately the sensation of breathing a different air. Even in the first few minutes, dozens of small things conspire to give you this feeling. The beer is bitterer, the coins are heavier, the grass is greener, the advertisements are more blatant. The crowds in the big towns, with their mild, knobby faces, their bad teeth and gentle manners, are different from a European crowd. Then the vastness of England swallows you up, and you lose for a while your feeling that the whole nation has a single identifiable character. Are there really such things as nations? Are we not 46 million individuals, all different? And the diversity of it, the chaos. Diversity not meaning, in the early 20th century, the same byword for non-white, non-native, as it is used in the 21st century, I might add. The clatter of clogs in the Lancashire mill towns, the to and fro of the lorries on the Great North Road, the communion through the mists of the autumn morning, all these are not only fragments but characteristic fragments of the English scene. How can one make a pattern out of this muddle? Just pausing for a moment here, if Orwell were alive today and writing about London, would he be writing about the Whitechapel tube station signs in Bengali, the smell of the open-air carcasses of a halal butcher's, the pan spat across Southall and Wembley Borough from the chewing tobacco imported from the Indian subcontinent? Would he say that these are all inextricable markers of British culture? Or would he identify these as imported aspects of foreign cultures that have imposed themselves onto Britain and therefore made Britain unrecognisable from the civilization he was describing in his day? I would bet the latter. Orwell continues, but talk to foreigners, read foreign books or newspapers, and you are brought back to the same thought. Yes, there is something distinctive and recognisable in English civilization. It is a culture as individual as that of Spain. It is somehow bound up with solid breakfasts and gloomy Sundays, smoky towns and winding roads, green fields and red pillar boxes. It has a flavour of its own. Moreover, it is continuous and stretches into the future and the past. There is something in it that persists, as in a living creature. What can the England of 1940 have in common with the England of 1840? But then, what have you in common with the child of 5 whose photograph your mother keeps on the mantelpiece? Nothing except that you happen to be the same person. And above all, it is your civilization. It is you. However much you hate it or laugh at it, you will never be happy away from it for any length of time. The suet puddings and the red pillar boxes have entered into your soul. Good or evil, it is yours, you belong to it, and this side the grave you will never get away from the marks that it has given you. Orwell's point is that though some of the external characteristics of the thing may change, the things that are constant are intrinsic properties of the thing that allow you to know that it is the same thing. You have to still be the same person or the same people, despite some external characteristics changing, to be recognisable to generations in the past and to those in the future who look back on what you were and what you built and bequeathed to them. So if you substitute out the people, the civilization is no longer the same, it is not recognisable. And the external characteristics, the culture, the customs, the folkways, the traditions of one people are recognisable to subsequent generations of the same people, but they are not communicable, by and large, to other peoples. This is why, no, Shabana, Orwell would not recognise you as English, because your people are not his people. But let's get beyond purely ethnic terms, because I think it's clear now that what Shabana Mahmood calls ethno-nationalism is actually just what every Englishman, including George Orwell, thought was true in the 1940s, and which remains true today despite the delusions of contemporary ideology. You can no more change your ethnicity or your ancestry by wishing than you can change your sex by putting on a dress. Let's talk about culture, because Shabana Mahmood is clearly making a civic nationalist case for national identity. She is saying she is indistinguishable from native English people by dint of her subscription to a set of British values, and if you disagree, of course you're a vile ethno-nationalist racist. She's building a straw man out of those of us who recognise that ethnicity exists, and it's actually a lot more important to tribal subcultures like Pakistan, for example, and the grooming gangs that Pakistan produces that prey on English children for their race, ethnicity, and religion, than it is to individualistic Englishmen like myself or George Orwell. So, what did George Orwell think were British values? What did he think were the defining characteristics of the English people? Well, in this lesser-known 1947 essay titled The English People, Orwell breaks those traits that are most recognisable among Englishmen, even by their foreign counterparts, down. On page 8, Orwell wrote, "It is worth trying for a moment to put oneself in the position of a foreign observer, new to England but unprejudiced, and able, because of his work, to keep in touch with ordinary, useful, and unspectacular people. Some of his generalisations would be wrong, because he would not make enough allowance for the temporary dislocations resulting from the war. Never having seen England in normal times, he might underrate the power of class distinctions, or think English agriculture healthier than it is, or be too much impressed by the dinginess of the London streets or the prevalence of drunkenness. But with his fresh eyes, he would see a great deal that a native observer misses, and his probable impressions are worth tabulating. Almost certainly, he would find the salient characteristics of the English common people to be artistic insensibility, gentleness, respect for legality, suspicion of foreigners, sentimentality about animals, hypocrisy, exaggerated class distinctions, and an obsession with sport. George Orwell enumerated among the characteristics intrinsic to native Englishmen, drawing a distinction between foreign and native, that they were suspicion of foreigners and the cultures and customs they bring to bear on their civilization. So by the very nature of Shabana Mahmood demanding that you recognize her as English, despite holding to a foreign religion, having foreign parentage, and, as we'll read on later, holding political opinions that are totally alien to the way that Englishmen expect politics to be conducted, Orwell would have classed her as one of the foreigners that Englishmen are right to be suspicious of. Also, it's kind of hard to argue that you're culturally English when you're so inconsiderate of animal welfare that you're willing to support the slitting of the throats of lambs to allow them to bleed out on the floor of an abattoir without stunning or anesthesia, while Arabic blares out from some loudspeaker so you can observe halal. Furthermore, on suspicion of foreigners, Orwell wrote on page 9 that the traditional English xenophobia is stronger among the working class than the middle class, which I suppose explains why, under Blair, Starmer, and Shabana Mahmood, Labour have abandoned the traditional working class for the progressive professional managerial class wearing lanyards in London, and also their immigrant client groups, like Pakistani Muslims, hence the covering up of the grooming gangs to this day, but of course that hasn't been rewarded now because they're voting for Muslim independent sectarian candidates across the country, including in Shabana's seat, I might add. Anyway, it was partly the resistance of the trade unions that prevented a really large influx of refugees from the fascist countries before the war, and when the German refugees were interned in 1940, it was not the working class that protested. The difference in habits, and especially in food and language, makes it very hard for English working people to get on with foreigners, and he is referring, by the way, to foreigners from Western Europe, who are culturally proximate, who share the same sort of ethnic heritage from Northwest Europe, and who differ in the type of beer they drink and the type of sausages they eat. He is not talking about Pakistani Muslims. Englishmen's diet, he notes, differs a great deal from that of any European nation, and they are extremely conservative about it. As a rule, they will refuse even to sample a foreign dish. They regard such things as garlic and olive oil with disgust. Life is unlivable to them unless they have tea and puddings. It turns out, actually, the food is not a very compelling argument for immigration to most Englishmen. We have the recipes, and most of us would prefer to eat beans on toast with grated cheese anyway. And the peculiarities of the English language make it almost impossible for anyone who has left school at 14 to learn a foreign language after he has grown up. And so when Shabana Mahmood, or Naz Shah, or even a Luton councillor standing for reform campaign in Urdu, it's even more jarring to us. It is a symbol that we are not represented in our own politics, and that politicians are willfully conspiring to dispossess us of our country. And so it is incredibly insulting when the Pakistani Muslim Home Secretary, who is currently creating more safe and legal routes for third world fake refugees to come into my country and live at taxpayers' expense, to demand that we reconfigure how we understand our own identity in order to accommodate her. And it's especially insulting as well because if there is such a thing as politically English, as in a politician in keeping with the traditions, the ancient customs and liberties listed in Magna Carta, which currently David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, is kind of getting rid of, and the 1689 Bill of Rights, if there is such a thing as politically English, then Shabana Mahmood certainly isn't politically English, and in fact she's far closer to Big Brother of 1984 than she is to George Orwell. On page 17, Orwell wrote, "Traditionally, the Englishman's home is his castle. In an age of conscription and identity cards, this cannot really be true. Turns out that identity cards or digital ID are anathema to how the English do things, Shabana. But the hatred of regimentation, the feeling that your spare time is your own, and that a man cannot be persecuted for his opinions is deeply ingrained, and the centralizing processes inevitable in wartime and still enforced have not destroyed it. Englishmen expect to be able to speak their mind and not be asked for their papers in their own country. Regarding freedom of speech, on page 18, Orwell continued, freedom of speech is a reality and respect for it is almost general. Extremely few English people are afraid to utter their political opinions in public, and there are not even very many who want to silence the opinions of others. In peacetime, when unemployment can be used as a weapon, there is a certain amount of petty persecution of the Reds. Remember, Orwell was a socialist. But the real totalitarian atmosphere, in which the state endeavours to control people's thoughts as well as their words, is hardly imaginable. It was hardly imaginable to George Orwell that, for example, Shabana Mahmood would be supporting a definition of Islamophobia that would criminalise conversations about the grooming gangs, or a country which arrests 33 people a day for offensive speech on social media or in person, something which Keir Starmer's government and her predecessor, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, promised to increase with the use of non-crime hate incidents. It would be inconceivable, for example, for George Orwell to support Shabana Mahmood's vision of Britain. She said at the Tony Blair Institute's Christmas event last December, clearly priming Shabana Mahmood to be Keir Starmer's successor soon, quote, when I was in justice, my ultimate vision for that part of the criminal justice system was to achieve, by means of AI and technology, what Jeremy Bentham tried to do with his panopticon. That is, the eyes of the state can be on you at all times. Similarly, in the world of policing in particular, we've already been rolling out live facial recognition technology, but I think there's big space here for being able to harness the power of AI and tech to get ahead of the criminals, frankly, which is what we're trying to do. If you don't know, the panopticon was a for-profit prison idea that Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher, devised, which had a central guard tower in the middle that was watching every cell at all times, because the cells were on the outside of the circular wall of the prison, and so whatever a prisoner was doing at any hour of the day could be seen by the guards. So she wants a digital panopticon to watch every citizen as if they are a criminal in prison. What she wants is Big Brother's telescreens. She, Shabana Mahmood, is closer to the party, INGSOC, in 1984 than she is to George Orwell. So perhaps when she said she has the patriotism of Orwell, she was referring to INGSOC's doublespeak, which demands that you recognise she is English just as it compels Winston Smith to say 2 and 2 can make 5. I'll finish on a poignant note from Orwell, who almost 80 years ago wrote the following. Nations do not often die out, and the English people will still be in existence 100 years hence, whatever has happened in the meantime. It was inconceivable for George Orwell that Englishmen would be a minority in their own country, that the British people could go extinct before the 1,000-year anniversary of the Battle of Hastings, but by 2063 we will become a minority in our own ancestral land because of the exact kind of philosophy and policies espoused and practiced by Shabana Mahmood. So, according to Shabana Mahmood, the great George Orwell was a vile ethno-nationalist. I think he was just incredibly sensible and poignant, and I don't think we should be taking lectures from Big Brother herself as to what is and isn't racist, and how we get to define ourselves in our own country.